Hey folks, welcome to my talk. I am going to be talking to you today about the business of training. So I'm really happy you're here and hope you'll have lots of questions when I'm done with my presentation. My name is Reuven and I teach Python and pandas for a living. My main thing is I do corporate training, and that's what I'm going to be talking to you about here. But I also offer a whole variety of online classes, recordings of those corporate trainings at learnerpython.com. I also have a whole bunch of newsletters, Better Developers for Python people, Bamboo Weekly for pandas people. I have a lot of things that I do, but they're all about teaching, learning Python and pandas. And I want to share with you how I got into this, how this business works, and why you should consider it for yourself. So let's talk a little bit about my evolution, at least my career evolution. So in 1993, I set up one of the first websites in the world. That's my big claim to fame. Basically, just after I'd finished a computer science degree at MIT, and I saw myself as a web developer. And okay, great. Now what do? I graduated. I'm in the world, web developer. Well, 2 years later, after going through two different jobs, I moved to Israel, where I live now, and I started consulting and training. What does that mean? Consulting was doing all sorts of web development and Linux, system administration, and just helping out with different programming projects. But pretty soon, some of my clients asked me to teach them to do what I was doing, that I shouldn't do the programming myself, but I should do some training. This was my first taste of what was going on, and we're going to talk about that more. In 2003, I moved to the U.S., back to the U.S. to start my PhD program, and I was doing consulting on the side, which my advisor did not know about, so don't tell him. And the whole idea was, well, I can consult from anywhere, I can work remotely, and so I can earn some money that way and pay for the PhD program. 2008, I returned back to Israel. I still was working on my PhD, but that's when things really changed. That's where my career took a huge change, in that I started to have a training company, John Bryce, they're still around here in Israel, market my courses for me. And that was a sea change in my work. In 2015, when I finished my PhD, I declared myself to be a trainer, not a coder, not someone who does projects. I am strictly doing training in Python. And I left John Bryce. I left the training company to go off on my own. And that's basically where I am today. Indeed, today, I'm earning 3 to 5 times what I was years ago, back when I was doing either consulting or training with John Bryce. My pipeline, meaning how much I am scheduled in advance, is often 6 to 10 months long. Right, I'm recording this in August, and I already have courses scheduled in January, and I'm talking to people about doing it beyond that. When I was doing projects, there was no way that I could schedule it that far in advance. Many fewer arguments with clients, much less stress. First of all, no one calls me up with bug reports in the middle of the night, right? We schedule the class in advance, and so long as we're on the same page about what needs to be taught, what the syllabus is, who's involved, what the payment is, and usually all that is set up front, as I'll talk to you about more, there's no stress. I show up, I teach, I finish, I charge them, end of story, until they call me back. And travel, at least until the pandemic, I was doing a lot of travel for my work because companies wanted me all around the world. Nowadays, that's much less true. Even when I work with companies all around the world, a lot of it is online. Sadly, I actually really enjoyed the travel. What can I say? And indeed, like in 2019, just before the pandemic, I taught in the US and in Europe and in Israel, where I live, right? And in India and in China. It was delightful. Again, nowadays, just about everything is online. So what I want to talk to you about is, how did I get there? Well, I guess I told you how I got there, but what does it mean for you, and what inspiration should you take from this? How did I do this, and how can you do this, and why should you do this? Now, I'm not trying to say that everyone should do training, but I think that if you enjoy speaking in front of an audience, it's definitely something that you should consider as an alternative to coding, and not something that, as some people are, you should be embarrassed by. It's no less important. It's no less interesting. And as I mentioned, it's much more lucrative. The key thing to understand about training is that it is a product, not a service. People are not bringing you in to offer your advice on something. They are buying an off-the-shelf product. They're buying a course that they want to provide to their staff. Moreover, training is an investment, and it's budgeted accordingly, right? From your customer's perspective, from your client's perspective, we're going to talk more about this in a moment. They have a pot of money that they want to invest to improve their productivity, and training is one way that they can do that. And so they don't see it as, oh no, we've got to pay this much for training. At least they shouldn't. They will say, wow, if we do training, we will get back such return on investment. It's totally worth doing. And if you can align those different considerations, that it's a product and it's a product that's worth investing in, you got it made. So let's talk about how companies can and do talk about training. So training is basically a catalyst for company efficiency. The whole idea is that a company can solve new problems and thus they can earn more. They can solve old problems faster so they can spend less, and they can encourage employees to stay, which means that they can spend less as well. Now, why am I concentrating on they can earn more, spend less? Because that is what companies want to do, right? They want to earn more, they want to spend less. And if you can help them to accomplish one or both of those goals, that is amazing. I also want to talk about this third bullet point here a little bit. Encourage employees to stay. People in high tech famously change jobs on a very frequent basis, every year or two often, in the case of many people that I know. And so if a company can offer training to its employees, those employees are more likely to stay because they believe, they're not wrong, that the company has their best interest at heart, or the company wants to help them out in terms of their career development. So if you have a choice between going to a company that will not invest in your training and staying at a company that will invest in your training, you'll often stay. And so I go to companies and do training, not necessarily just because they need Python and pandas in their day-to-day work, but because people know people are taking these for career development, not necessarily because it's like day-to-day. I also want to mention that training managers. All right, so training managers are this catch-all term that I use for the person who makes the decisions about training. And they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and titles. It can be the chief learning officer. It can be someone in talent management or talent development. It can be someone in human resources. It can be someone with an unofficial responsibility for doing this. But I just refer to them as training managers because it's like my person with whom I speak. They are my point of contact at the company. They make the decision, and they are the people who make the decisions about the investment as well, about the money as well. They are given a budget. Go improve our productivity. Help us to spend less and to earn more via training. And so if you can get in good with a training manager, if they are convinced that you are helping them not only to achieve their goals, but to do it in a pleasant, easy way, again, you've got it made. Now, again, not every company has a training manager, but most companies have someone who has this role. Sometimes they even have a whole division that has this role. I will also add that these training managers are often completely unknown to the engineers and other staff at a company. They'll get email before a course saying, from the training manager saying, go to such and such a room at such and such a time. But really, how often do they talk to the training managers? Almost never. Would they know who they were? Almost certainly not. So here's a little tip of, before we talk about it more later, trying to ask an engineer to contact a training manager for you is almost definitely doomed to failure just because they have no idea who these people are. But the training managers are really important. How important are they? They are your clients. I know it sounds super, super weird. What does this mean? It means that if a course is successful, then it was a worthwhile investment, right? So if the course was successful, then the training manager has done their job well. They're seen as having done their job well by their colleagues, and they will invite you back. An unsuccessful course is a bad investment, right? So if you totally crash and burn, well, maybe they'll work with you to improve your courses, but probably they just won't ask you back. Now, the thing is, how does the training manager know if you've done your job well? And this is a weird thing. They look at a survey, and we're going to talk about this more as well, a survey that is given out to the students who are in the class. Has a training manager ever come into my class to see me teach? Almost never. In nearly 30 years of doing this, I can count maybe on the fingers of one hand the number of times that a training manager has actually come to see me teach. But they do pay close attention to the surveys. By the way, if they were to come in and see me teach, they wouldn't understand what I was talking about anyway, because they are typically not technical people. So the client you have to satisfy is not actually there consuming the product that you are selling to them, which creates a weird situation. But that's the way it is. So Maybe you want to think about working for a training company like I did. There are a lot of advantages in doing this. And indeed, in working at a training company, I had a great time overall. First of all, they have contacts. These training companies typically have thousands and thousands of companies on their mailing lists. They blast out email to them every week or every month saying, this is what we have available. The companies know that they can turn to the training company and say, we need a course in whatever. We need it in Python security. We need it in Git for Teams. We need it in C++ for, I don't know, for embedded systems. It's the training company's job then to go find a trainer who can provide such a course. And that's why they have a stable of trainers on their payrolls or at their beck and call available to do such things. So they have contacts, and they then, if they have that many leads and that many companies with whom they work, they can fill your time. This is especially true if it's for hot technologies. And also, you can start with them right away. If you call up a training company and you say to them, hey, I'm a Python trainer, they'll say, oh, great, we have a company that needs Python training. Can you start tomorrow? I might be exaggerating a little bit, but I don't think I'm exaggerating a lot. This means that you don't have to spend years and years developing your business, developing contacts, and doing marketing. They will do it for you. So that sounds fantastic. What could possibly be wrong with that? Truth be told, for many people, it's a great deal. It is a great deal. And if you don't want to deal with sales and marketing and all that other stuff, go for it this way. But there are two big disadvantages of working with a training company. Number one is they will often sign you on a non-compete clause. Now, do I like this? No. Do I understand it? Yes. A non-compete clause means that, let's say you leave the training company and all the companies with whom you worked, where you taught, now want to work with you because they like you and they don't care about the training company. That was just a middleman. So the non-compete clause ensures that you're not allowed to do that, that if you do that, they will come and sue you. And non-compete clauses come in a whole variety of flavors and sizes and shapes. I once worked with a training company that tried to sign me on a non-compete that would have prevented me from working for 3 years after leaving them with any company on their mailing list. Clearly, this was absurd and a reach, but they tried. Also, they often take a lot of the money, and that can be 30%, it can be 50%, it can be 60%. Back a number of years ago, it was at least 10 years ago, probably 15 years ago, there was a training company in the US that wanted to work with me. They desperately needed a Python course. I didn't have a lot going on for a while, so I was like, you know what, fine, I'll take a little bit of a hit in terms of how much I'm willing to charge them. And then I discovered not only was I going to be paid less than I normally would have been and would have expected, but they expected me to fund the flight and the hotel costs out of my budget as well. So training companies can be very good to work with, but they can also be really slimy. You have to be careful and you have to really understand the deal well. You have to understand that when you start working with them, it won't be easy if you just leave them and continue training for the same people you were working with. So let's talk a little bit about how you can, assuming you're on your own, do some business development. So first of all, how would you approach a company? How do you do proposals? How do you charge? And how do you turn courses into a high income pipeline? So let's go about all these. First of all, what is the goal? The goal is for clients to call you asking nonstop for courses, right? What you would love is for your phone to be ringing off the hook. I guess there are no hooks anymore, right? But you would like for your phone to be ringing, your email box to be full with companies saying, please, please, would you come and give us training? If you train often and well, this actually will happen. First of all, companies will ask you to return if you've done a good job. And medium and large size companies, especially big companies, have an almost infinite demand for courses. So if you're at a massive company and you teach well, they might want you to come in. There was one company I was working with for years that I did 2 or 3 courses for them every quarter. I did an intro Python course, I did an advanced Python course, I did a Git course every single quarter. It was amazing. Here's another thing. People switch jobs, as I mentioned earlier, in the high-tech world very often, and they then tell their bosses. This happens to me all the time. I get a call from a company. I've never heard of them before. They want me to do some training. Oh, that's great. And I asked them, where did you hear about me? Oh, so-and-so on our team was at training that you did a few years ago, and when we said that we're moving to Python, they asked that we bring you in. Amazing, right? And so the longer you're in the training world and the more these people change jobs again and again and again, the more people you basically have in a network like pitching for you. And here's the thing, people also talk to friends at other companies. So I've sometimes heard from training managers, oh, I called you because a training manager I know at another company told me to call you, right? Or engineers, some lead engineer somewhere said, I said, my company was starting to use Python, and I spoke to a colleague at another company with whom I'd worked previously, and they said to call you. The other thing is, and this is very counterintuitive, it's far easier if you specialize. Being a trainer in programming will not help. Being a coder who also does some training will not help. You want to get to a really clear niche. The moment that I started saying, I do Python training, full stop, it was a major change in my career. People knew what I did and people knew what I didn't do. Right? Sometimes they'll still ask me, hey, can you do training in Java or something? No, that's not something I know. That's not something I do. Now, it sounds if you specialize like it's going to be boring. It sounds like if you specialize that people are not going to want you. But on the contrary, an example, let's say a data example that I've heard from people is if you open the yellow pages, like let's say your sink is clogged and you open the yellow pages and you need a plumber to help unclog your sink. If you look, you'll see plumber and plumber and plumber, pages and pages of plumbers. But if someone says, we unclog sinks, that speaks to your needs. And you're going to call them because they specialize. In the same way, if your training specializes in a particular technology, in a particular aspect of something, then you're more likely to get called. You'll have a much smaller number of potential clients. But when they need you, they really need you. So you want to make yourself special. And why would a company hire you to train? Maybe it's a niche technology not many people know. Maybe you're an active developer on an open source project. Maybe you used it for a long time. Maybe you write, like in my case, I write a bunch of newsletters. I do YouTube videos, so that makes you an authority. Lots of speaking. So I have spoken now 6 years in a row at the PyCon US conference and 6 years in a row at the EuroPython conference. I think I'm the only person who has done it for that long at either, definitely at both. And so I am out there as a public speaker. I'm there, someone people know that if they need training, they'll call me up. So what about approaching companies? I will tell you very honestly, this is hard. Very, very hard. It takes time. It takes luck. It takes persistence. And quite frankly, I'm not that good at it. I often get in, as I described earlier, that people reach me. That's much more successful, but obviously depends on them doing something. But I have managed to get to talk to companies. How? Through mutual contacts. So I ask friends and colleagues about where they work. What training do they have? What training do they like and dislike? What training do they need? Maybe they can introduce me to the training manager. Again, they probably don't know who the training manager is. I just spoke a few days ago with a friend of mine who used to be a training manager at a company. And she said, oh, would you like me to introduce you to the training managers at my previous companies? Right? So that's pretty great. She's using her contacts and she'll help me out. Now, obviously, it's not a guarantee I'll get those jobs, but that is a great way to go. You can contact the training managers, but it is a low chance of success. I've sometimes gotten positive responses from that, but it's not, it's a low percentage chance. The other thing is who's hiring, right? Sometimes I've done this, that I've gone and looked at which companies are hiring Python people. And if a company is hiring a lot of Python people, they'll probably need some help onboarding them. But again, this is something that takes a long time and persistence. Don't expect it to work right away. It will easily take years for this to work, unless you're better at it than I am, which is quite possible. Now, the best kinds of clients, as I mentioned earlier, are the biggest companies, the enterprise clients. They're the best. They have huge budgets, huge demand. They let you schedule far in advance. But again, it's hard to break into these places unless you have a reputation or someone who can pull you in. What about startups? Startups are way easier to get into. Startups and very small companies, right? They're smaller, they're scrappier. They don't necessarily have a formal training manager. So if you contact them, and I have succeeded sometimes with this, if you contact them, it's like, oh yeah, we do use Python. Oh wow, we can do some training. Yeah, maybe let me talk to the CTO. And the CTO is, of course, at the desk next door in the same office, even if it's a small company. The scheduling is often more immediate. So whereas my enterprise clients like to schedule things months and months in advance, my startup clients are like, wait, you can't come next week? No. How about like 2 months from now? Oh, fine. The bottom, however, the downside is they have fewer courses. So like you might be able to sell to them very quickly, but it's going to take, they won't want as many. All right. So as you can hear from this, it's very important to build authority. speak at user groups, speak at conferences. I love speaking at conferences, not just because I enjoy it, not just because I learn a lot in the process, but because it is a great way for me to build my reputation. Remember that most conferences now put up talks on YouTube. So you effectively you can leverage their YouTube channel and get your name out. By the way, every time one of my talks goes up on YouTube, I add it to a playlist on my YouTube channel of my talks so people can see what I've done. I don't get paid to speak at conferences, which is just fine with me. I'm very happy also to speak at user groups. There are lots of Python user groups all around the world, and I'm very happy to speak at them for free. Granted, remote, but that's fine with me. Now, the attendees at conferences and these user groups, they work for companies that might need your training. So the more you can get out there, get your name out, build your authority, the better. Now, a good talk will not only show that you know the topic, they'll show that you know how to explain it. And there's a difference, as I learned in my PhD program in education, there's a difference between content knowledge and pedagogical content knowledge. Content knowledge is the technical stuff. How do you write software? Pedagogical content knowledge is how do you explain it? And these are different skills. If you can show that you can explain things well and clearly to people, that is a rare skill that, by the way, takes time to improve on. So get cracking. Always tell people that you do training. They will not guess. They will not know. Even if you just taught them, even if you just gave a talk, they're not going to know that you do training for a living. So I always start my talks by saying I do training, and I end my talks by saying I do training. So I tell people to look at my LinkedIn profile, and there I mention training. My website. And by the way, my website also has syllabi for all the courses I offer. No one looks at this. But when someone calls me or emails me and I say, oh, yeah, you can look at my site. Oh, wow, you must really be a trainer if you have the syllabi there. Okay. So a company is interested in what you're doing. They might want a course from you. Now you have to produce a proposal. What's in the proposal? So you're going to have to talk about who's the audience for this. What background do they need? Right? A syllabus and outline format doesn't need to be super long or formal, just something they can latch onto. Prerequisites, expected results, maximum participants, the cost and cancellation dates and terms. Now, I will add, for a long time, I have said, here is my standard intro Python course. Here's my standard advanced Python course. I've stopped saying this as of about 2 years ago. Now what I say is the syllabi up on my website are the outline basic courses. But you know what? I'm going to try to give you a special customized course. Tell me what your needs are. Tell me what special things you'll need. It could be in the end, the special course you give them is 100% identical to the courses that you've given to everyone else. That is, in fact, likely. But they will get a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that you are doing something special for them. They don't know that their requirements are not that special. But by saying, oh, yeah, I'm going to draw up a special syllabus for you, great thing. You must also tell them how much of the course is hands-on. They will ask you how much of it is live, how much of it is exercises. And you should say at least 30%. Any number you want to give is fine, but at least that's the number that I usually give, and they love that. Now, how anyone can give a course without hands-on practice is beyond me, but people do, and that's bonkers. And so you really want to emphasize that you have lots of exercises. People love it. I will tell you also, by the way, that over the last number of years, just about every year, I've taken content out of most of my courses, and I've added exercises, and people are happier. I get higher ratings. People want exercises. They want practice. Now, how far in advance can you schedule things? As I said, some companies love to do it 6 to 12 months in advance. I have a client, longtime client of mine, big Fortune 500 company, that as opposed to small Fortune 500 companies. Anyway, so they like to schedule up to 12 months in advance. Now, there's no way that I'm going to do that. Why? Because I don't know what my family situation is going to be like. Are we going to go on vacation? Do my kids have things? Does my wife have things? Do I like all sorts of stuff? But I do like to schedule things at least like 4 or 5 months in advance, maybe even 6 or 7, and that gives me a lot of peace of mind. And this is especially true if a company has an internal marketplace for courses. Some big companies, like the one I just mentioned, they basically say, okay, you want to do a Git course? Great, we're going to put that up on our internal boards, and if enough people sign up, then the course will happen. And so by having a variety of courses and by having them in their internal sort of message boards and marketplace for a long time, people will get to know you. The downside is, and this is true for this big company I work with, they don't say who the trainer is. So I have people email me from the company every so often. Hey, I see there's such and such a course. Are you giving it? Because if so, I want to go to it. Now that's a very nice feeling. And so sometimes at the end of a course, I'll say to them, and here are the next things I'm teaching. That first of all reduces the chance that a course will be canceled. And of course, it's good for my ego. Pricing, everyone's favorite topic. How are we going to price things? Well, first of all, there are two basic ways to price. You can price per person or you can price per day. So per person means each person attending the course is, let's say, $200, $300, $500, whatever it's going to be. They then have an incentive to keep it a small number, or they have no incentive to make it a big number because what do they care? You have to make sure that's a minimum number then. You can also charge per day. That is definitely my preference. And then I don't care how many people show up, right? I'm going to get my flat fee. Now, I'll tell you, sometimes, though, these companies will come back to me and say, well, we don't have enough people to justify doing this course. Will you reduce your price? And my answer is no, I never agree to reduce my price. Why? Why am I so stubborn about that? Because the first time I reduced my price, I've now reduced my price forever. They will come back to me with literally every course and say, can you reduce your price for this and this and this? And I really don't want that headache. And I really don't I'd rather have them cancel it and keep my reputation so long as the cancellations don't happen too often. I'll add, by the way, that there is a hybrid, which is per day plus per person. What do I mean by that? Some companies, so I'll say to companies, there's a cap of 20 people for this course. And then they'll come back to me and say, oh, we have 22. Is that okay? So I'll say, well, it's 20 people. The price is for 20 people. Each additional person is X. And that is meant to be a disincentive for them, from loading up lots of people. I tell them, and this is the truth, that I want it to be a small group so that I can interact with them, I talk to them, get their questions. I don't want to charge them extra for each person, but sometimes that just happens, and it's it works pretty well. Now, how much can you charge, right? It's very nice to say charge per day. How much can you charge? It depends on a lot of factors. It depends on the country, and the US is definitely paying the most. It depends on the topic. It depends on the company, right? So some topics you can charge more for. Some companies are just never going to pay more than a minimum amount. But you can definitely make $6,000 a day, $10,000 a day, even $12,000 a day teaching for some of these companies. And that means, let's say you get to $6K a day, that means that a company will pay you for a 4-day course $24,000. That is amazing. And sometimes even more. Right, it all depends on different things. Now, these companies sometimes, like I mentioned, some companies are cheapskates. I just got to give you an example here. So, and this is a very Israeli example, so it might not apply to where you live. So, I sent in a proposal to a company here in Israel, and I get a call then from the purchasing department. The purchasing department is better known as the let's try to get the price reduced department. That's really all they seem to do. So, when you get a call from the purchasing department, you know that they're going to complain about your rates. So they said to me, you're going to have to reduce your rates. We can't pay this much. And I said, I'm sorry, that's my rate. I'd rather lose the course. And they said, really? We've never heard that before. And I said, well, that's my policy. And the woman on the other end of the phone starts getting very nervous. And she says, listen, we really want this course, but my boss will kill me if you don't reduce the price. Can you please give me something? So I reduced the price by $25 a day. Something absurdly small that who cares? And sure enough, when I charged them, they made sure that I'd given them that discount of $25 a day. When I next, by the way, increased my prices, which I do every few years, I made sure to make it equivalent to what I charge all the rest of my clients, and there's not been a peep from them since. But you should know different clients are going to give you headaches about that in different places. But you have to remember at the end of the day, they see it and it's an investment. And let me just do this math for you so you understand it. A company's engineers, let's just make the numbers round here, make $100,000 a year, okay? Let's say you make them 10% more efficient. So that means per engineer, it's $10,000. If you teach 20 people in your course, right? So $10,000 times 20 people, you've now saved them $200,000. So of course they'll pay you $24,000 to save $200,000, right? That's a fantastic investment, but they have to see it that way. They often do. Sometimes you have to walk them through this math. Evaluations, as I mentioned earlier, the evaluations at the end of the course, that's how the training manager knows if your course was good. Make sure your students fill out the evaluation and get as much feedback as you can from them. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that there's going to be a numeric score, and you want that to be as high as possible. But there's also going to be like an essay portion. There's going to be a part where they get to write what their feedback is, and that's gold. But you've got to get a high score. That's like your main goal, above and beyond everything else. Why? Because the training manager is evaluated by their bosses on your scores. If you get a high score, they look good for bringing you in. You get a low score, they look bad for bringing you in. Make them look good, get a high score. Okay? And so here's the score from a course that I did a number of years ago, where basically they said the instructor quality was 9.91. That's the only thing that affected me, right? Like everything else, the training duration, the learning effectiveness, the satisfaction, maybe all overall satisfaction. But basically, instructor quality, that's going to be whether you get returned or not. By the way, I just have to say, this is really funny. This was in a class I did in Beijing, and people were asked to rate me and the class, all these things, on a scale from 1 to 9. How then did I get scores above 9? Heaven knows. And so one of my clients then gives me this sort of graph every quarter, right? How well did you do? What was the overall sort of satisfaction? And you know that they want you to be at that top of the graph. If you're there, then they are happy and they will bring you in for more stuff. So after the numeric score, as I mentioned, use the feedback. They're going to write down where you can make things better. Use that. So here is from a course that I did, right? I did a Python for non-programmers class. So what more would they like in the class? So maybe some more about APIs, maybe about JSON. Okay, now what did I do? The next time I taught this class, I said, let's finish this up by showing you a practical example of using an API to retrieve JSON and working with it. People loved it. People absolutely loved it. And so just a little bit of nudging on that front can really help. Also, listen to the students during the class. Don't just wait for the feedback because they won't write everything. So, for example, I found that people, maybe they wrote in their feedback, but definitely they would mention, they would say, so what are we doing next? I don't use slides in my classes. I live code, I type while I'm talking. And so it was very hard for them to sort of understand where we were. So now I open each course and each day with an agenda. Before each break, I then say, here's what we're going to do after the break. Those problems have gone away, and now, like, it's great. It's great. Okay. Yeah, people give me all sorts of different things here, right? The hands-on interactive teaching style where theory was presented visually, dynamically, and not statically on a slide. People love that, right? And that stands out, right? This course was for beginners. I found it slow. I would have chosen an intermediate or advanced course. Now, okay, they're saying this. They would have chosen, I have 10 years of programming experience, but in other languages. This is the sort of comment that I ignore. Why? Because this course was called Python for non-programmers. If you have 10 years of experience programming, do not take a course called Python for non-programmers. And so if everyone gave this sort of feedback, then I would think maybe I did something wrong. But if one person gives this feedback, okay, they just do not read very carefully. Okay, upselling. Based on your evaluations, go back to the company and say, hey, I have some new course ideas. You know that there's a need now. You know that the client likes you, and why not? So the best upsells I've done, this course I just mentioned, Python for non-programmers. Why? Because my intro Python classes, people would say to me, you know, this is a little hard because I don't have a programming background. So I now call my intro Python course, Intro to Python for Experienced Programmers, though I need a better name. And then Python for non-programmers is one of my most popular courses. Data science and machine learning with Python. So many of the people in my classes said, we're taking this class because we want to use Python for data science. There we go. My Python practice workshop, this was my favorite. People always want more exercises. So I said to one of my clients, what about an email course that I've developed where every week for 15 weeks they get an exercise in Python? Would you be willing to pay for that? They were, we don't pay for email courses. That's ridiculous. So I said, what about a day-long course in which I come in and I give them exercises? Oh my God, that's a brilliant idea. We'll definitely do that. It's the same content. They're paying more. Okay. I mean, granted, I'm also there with them. So, and we can go over people's answers. So it's not just the same as email, but it's pretty close in many ways. And your companies, your clients are not going to know what you teach if you don't tell them. So I was at a client and I happened to mention to the training manager something about my Git courses. She said, wait, you teach Git? I thought you only taught Python. I can't believe you teach Git. We just hired a Git course instructor. 6 months later, the same training manager calls me and says, you know, you mentioned you teach Git. The guy we hired, he was terrible. You want to teach Git for us? And voila, I was teaching Git there. More courses, of course, more different courses make it easier to fulfill your calendar, because if a company chooses 2 courses or 3 courses, bam, it's filled. So finally, some people love to teach, right? And I love it. I get a thrill of sharing information, helping people, helping their companies. And I don't find teaching intro courses boring at all. I think it's exciting and fun. Some people only like teaching experts. That's fine. Now, when I teach, it's kind of like a one-man play, right? I often try to learn from. I read a lot about stand-up comedians, and not necessarily their jokes, but I try to learn about their techniques, because it's them and an audience trying to communicate ideas and get reactions from people just using words typically. And training is not that different in many ways. So I enjoy it. I enjoy getting up and talking to people. But here's my 8th grade yearbook, believe it or not. I know, I was a geek then, right? And what were my goals? To be a computer engineer, to write books, and to teach. There you go, folks. I fulfilled my destiny. All right. I'm available now for questions. I would love to take them from you, but I would love to hear from you online as well. You can email me, get me on Twitter. I'm also on Threads and on LinkedIn. I have my course at learnerpython.com. And if you're interested in training, you can check out Trainer Weekly, trainerweekly.com, where I every single week send out a new newsletter about the training industry and how it works and the lessons that I've learned. Thank you so much for joining me. Let's hope you have lots of questions. Be happy to take them now.